We're going to start at Sugya 1.4. So as a quick reminder that in Sugya 1.3, there was a discussion about makeups. Makeup davenings. And we had a statement, if you remember, that Rav Mari quoted ultimately Rabbi Yochanan, who said that if a person makes a mistake and he doesn't daven Mariv, he can make it up by davening two shacharis. Likewise, if a person missed shacharis, if he missed shacharis, he can also make that up by davening two minchas. And we said, okay, that's not the proper way of doing it, that's not the best way of doing it. Yes, it's true that technically that works. However, you don't get the reward for davening in the right time. You only get the reward for davening. So there's a davening, and then there's davening at the right time. Right? When you daven at the right time, you get extra brownie points, whereas davening, you can daven 24/7. You can always daven in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you can always supplicate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However, davening at the right time is better, and that's the right thing to do. That you won't have if you do this makeup kind of deal. Okay, that was in 1.3. 1.4, Iboiluhu. What does Iboiluhu mean? They posed the question. Now, as I think I mentioned in the past, Iboiluhu there are different terms used in the Gemara for questions. Some questions are like Eisve or Meisve, which the Gemara is going to bring a little later. That always implies an attack question, a challenge question. You said something, and I am going to challenge that because I have a source to tell me that you are wrong. And what you said is incorrect. And I'll prove to you from a written source that you are incorrect. That's what meisve means. It's an attack question. 95% of the time, meisve is from a brisa, right? Some brisa. Mind you that the Amoraim, the people who got into the Gemara, knew Mishnayos backwards and forwards, upside down and right side up. You will never catch someone on a Mishnah. At least never catch someone in the Gemara on a Mishnah, right? You might catch us on a Mishnah, but not them. But you might catch them on a brisa, because brisas were not originally written down, and they were not as carefully learned as Mishnah. And therefore, and some were obscure, some were not so well known, so therefore brises were prevalent, and people asked from brises all the time. Now that's meisve. There's another one similar to meisve, which is maskif. Maskif means, I'll ask you a question, but from logic. Logic tells me that what you just said does not make sense. Okay, so those are attack questions. Iboiluhu, it always means like a halachic query. Which means, you didn't say anything that I'm going to challenge. I am just going to pose a question, like, go over to the rabbi and ask him, is this kosher? He didn't say anything which prompted me to challenge him. I just went over because I don't know the answer, and hopefully he does. And therefore, I go over and ask him that question. Okay? So that's what Iboiluhu means. Literally means it was needed to them. But it means is that they, meaning the people in the Beis Medrash, discussed the following issue, discussed this following question. Okay. Ta, help me out. Ta means made a mistake. V'lo yispalel mincha, and he didn't daven mincha. Mahu, what is the halacha sheyispalel arvis shtayim? That he should daven Mariv twice, okay? Now, as we pointed out in 1.3, Rabbi Yochanan did not talk about this. Rabbi Yochanan talked about if you missed Mariv, you can daven two shacharis, and if you missed shacharis, you can daven two minchas. But interestingly enough, he missed one. He did not talk about this case, about what happens if he missed mincha. Can he daven two marivs? That's the question that they're posing now. So you scratch your head and you say, well, hey, if there's such a thing as makeup, you can make up from missing chakras by davening 2 minchas or, whatever. So what's it different over here? Why shouldn't you be able to make it up from mincha and daven 2 maros? What's the difference? So the Gemara says, I know why you're thinking. And the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Here the Gemara points out, as often is, that the Gemara talks through the 2 sides of the coin on this question. And I'll tell you why I think maybe yes and why I think maybe no. Like I told you before, sometimes we ask questions out of ignorance. The Gemara does not ask ignorant questions. The Gemara asks a question, you can bet your bottom dollar that it had a reason to think this way and had a reason to think that way. And the Gemara is going to tell you, in this case, why it is that the Gemara discusses and asks this question. So the Gemara says it outright. Im tim soloimar, help me out.
If it comes out the same.
Okay, if you find to say, which means, let's assume, if you're going to say, all right, ta'ah, he made a error, he made a mistake, v'lo yispal arvis, and he didn't daven mispal shacharis shtayim, then he can daven 2 shacharises. Okay? Which means the Gemara is saying, if you're going to tell me, I know what you're thinking what? Well, if you can miss Mariv and make it up by davening 2 shacharises, you're going to say, well, so why is it, okay, if that works, so why shouldn't this work? Right? Not so fast. You see, even if you're going to say that over there, that's mishum, because dechad yomahu. Help me out, what does it mean? Dechad yoma. That is, there's a prefix. That one day who it is. Because from missing Mariv to Shacharis, that's still within 1 day. Dichsiv, as it's written in the Pasuk, the famous Pasuk, Vayhi Erev Vayhi Voker, it was evening and it was morning, Yom Echad, day 1, right? The end of the first paragraph, the very first paragraph of the Torah, right? Vayhi Erev Vayhi Voker, Yom Echad, which is the source, in a different place in the Gemara and Brachos, is the source why we, in the Jewish calendar, start the day at night. We start the day at Tzeis HaKochavim of the night before, right? Everybody knows Shabbos starts on the night before, right? Everybody knows that. Yom Tov always starts the night before. The only reason why certain fast days don't do that is only because that those are rabbinic. And the rabbis can be lenient and say that you only have to fast during the day rather than the night before. But the day always starts at night, starts the night before, at nightfall. We all know that.
Tisha B'Av, rabbinic?
Yes, Tisha B'Av is rabbinic, but because of its stringency and because of all the calamities which occurred and all of the calamities which occurred subsequently is all because of that. So that, the Chazal decided that was so strict and so important that it was worthwhile starting the night before. But, right, because that's not rabbinic, that is from the Torah. The Torah, well, you got to start the night before. That's the rule, right? And we learn it from this pasuk. But meanwhile, getting back to this discussion, so we have a pasuk that says Vayiyara Vayivoker Yom Echad. It was evening, it was morning, day 1, which means that the day in the Hebrew calendar starts the night before. Therefore, if you miss a Mariv, you can make it up by 2 shacharises. That's because it's still within 1 day. Aval hacha, help me out, what does that mean?
However, here.
But here, good. Hacha means here, good. Tefillah b'makam karban hi. Help me? Good. Davening is in the place of a karban. It is. And we have a rule by karban, the kevan the avar yoma, and Since the day has passed, botol karbano, then that day's carbon is now nullified. Simply put, there's no such thing as makeups by carbon. If you miss a carbon, you missed it. You blew it. If you missed it on the day, you missed it. Now, there might be such a thing as a delayed carbon, but not a missed carbon. That is, let's say that for some reason something happened in the Beis Hamikdash and they couldn't bring the morning daily sacrifice in the usual time, which was pretty early in the morning, right? They were up and at 'em before dawn over there, right? So something happened and they couldn't bring it in time. Okay, so you bring it sometime during the day. But what happens if you miss the entire day? What happens? Okay, then tomorrow goes back to normal. Do you bring another one to make up for yesterday's? Nope. Over Yomo, Batal Karbano. If the day passes, that's it. Batal Karbano, that the carbon is now nullified, meaning it's gone. You can't make it up. It's no longer viable anymore. That's it. You missed it, you missed it. Well, so the Gemara is now introducing a very interesting concept. The Gemara is introducing the idea that tefillah, prayer, is connected to karbanos, which the Gemara is going to talk about that in more detail a little later on in this parak, about the idea that tefillos and karbanos are very connected. Well, if tefillah is in place of a carbon, and we know that the rule is that a carbon, once you miss the carbon on day one, you cannot make it up on day two. So perhaps tefillah follows the same concept. And therefore it comes out that tefillah also, you cannot make up a missed mincha by davening two maris because you are crossing the border into the next day. That's already, you're done. Over Yomo, Batzal Karbano. So that's one side. So this whole thing is side one. Side one says you cannot make it up from Mincha to Mariv, missing Mincha and then davening two Mariv because you're crossing the line into the second day. So that's the reason why that may be significantly different than missing a Shacharis and making up by Mincha, or missing a Mariv and making it up to Shacharis. Because those are in the same day, this one is not. Oh, Dilma, help me. Or perhaps, now the Gemara is going to say the other side of the coin. Kevan, since ditzlosa rachamehi, since that ditzlosa, what does that mean? That, again, the dalet is a prefix, that, ditzlosa, that, prayer. Rachmehi is mercy, which means it's always mercy. Prayer, Rachmehi, prayer is mercy. That's the whole idea of davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, recognizing your dependency on God. Well, kol emas deboi. Help me out.
Anytime that you want to say prayer.
At any time that you want or any time that you need, matzli v'yozil. You can pray and continue. Which means that essentially prayer is asking mercy. If the main idea here is mercy, so then mercy is that you don't change from needing mercy just because you missed the day. You need mercy the next day just like you needed today. So therefore, if davening is more a mercy issue, so then there should be no time limitations. So really, if I was a yeshiva shalamdan, what does a yeshiva shalamdan mean? A yeshiva shalamdan means the kind of guy who can analyze what's going on and can tell you over the depth of something, right? That's a yeshiva shalamdan. So yeshiva shalamdan is saying in different words, what the Gemara is telling you here is like this. the Gemara is asking a fundamental question about what prayer is. You see, both aspects are true. I do know that prayer is certainly mercy. I also do know from the Gemara later on, as the Gemara says, that prayer is connected to karbonos. The question is, okay, which one is more primary, which one is more secondary? Is the primary one its connection to karbonos, and it's secondarily asking for mercy? In other words, is the main purpose of prayer to replace the karbonos? And whereas in the Beis Hamikdash we used to worship God through the means of karbonos, now we worship God, unfortunately, without a Beis Hamikdash, we have to worship God through our prayers. That's instead of the karbonos, but its primary focus and function is to replace the karbonos. If that's its primary function, sure, we're asking mercy, of course. But if the primary function of prayer is to replace the karbonos, well, then it should have the halachas of karbonos. And thus, if he misses a day, you're done. You can't make it up. Or, nope. Maybe the primary function is mercy. And going up to supplicate before Hashem is the main thing. Secondarily, they connected it to karbonos. While you're asking mercy, let's connect it to karbonos. But that's secondary, not primary. What's the difference whether it's secondary or primary? This Allah. If the main thing, if the primary thing is karbonos, if you missed mincha, you cannot make it up by 2 maras because you've crossed into the next day. Karbonos dictate, over yomo, batal karbono, once the day is gone, you're done. But if the primary thing is mercy, asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for your needs, if that's the primary and the secondary thing is karbonos, well, so then the primary thing is timeless. You're not bound to a day when it comes to mercy from God. You can supplicate God 24/7, 365.
But do you still call it mincha? I'm
sorry?
Do you still call it mincha?
Well, yeah, that was secondarily that we connected. We said a shacharis, a mincha, a mariv, right? That's a secondary concept. But if you miss the mincha, can you make it up by 2 marivs? The answer would be yes, according to that. Okay? Therefore, the Gemara is asking what's really comes out to be an interesting fundamental question as to what is the nature of davening. Is the nature of davening primarily a function of replacement of karbonos, or is the primary thing to supplicate God? That's the question. You hear that that's really what it boils down to, this question, right? Got it? Okay. So if I would be pointing this on the board, what I would be writing it would be like this. So here's my question. Here's my question, I guess you would say, right? So here's question up in red. If you would be follow along in the outlines over here, you would say it like this. Okay, here's a question. Can one make up a missed mincha by davening 2 times mariv? That's the question that the Gemara poses. And here are the 2 sides of the coin. Side 1. Okay, we'll call this the con. Perhaps not. Why? Since prayer is connected, to karbanos, and by karbanos we know over Yom Baltul Karbano, if the karban is missed one day, it is nullified. Here too, we are going from one day to the next, because Vayi Erev Vayi Voker, right? We know that that is one day. So you are going from day 1 to day 2. So if it's connected to Karbanos, no can do. But let's go the other side, or perhaps the main concept of prayer is mercy, which is timeless. So those are the two sides to my question. So again, the Gemara is asking an interesting fundamental question as to how to look at prayer, and here is a halachic difference in how to, depending on which side I take. Okay, yes?
Is this deeper like Hasidim and Misnagdim?
Well, okay. The question was, is this like a Hasidim and Misnagdim question? Okay, yeah, I understand where you're coming from. Yeah.
I'm talking about Hasidim like at 9:30 at night.
Okay, yeah, there are.
Pitch black. I mean,
There are.
not there anymore.
It is well known that certain Hasidim seem to ignore times of prayer, and people have been known, Hasidish people have been known to daven very, 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 very odd times, right? Like you just said, davening mincha at 9:30 at night, right? Some of the big rebbes, they would daven mincha late. So you mentioned it, so I'm going to get off on a little bit of a tangent just to discuss that point. Okay.
Not reliable.
Okay. It is
They can do it.
my understanding, okay, is my understanding. I've been asked this question before about what's going on with these rebbes. I mean, they're tzaddikim, right? And they're Talmid Chachamim, and they know that Shacharis is supposed to be done until 4 hours of the day, right? And they daven at 4 in the afternoon. Okay? So what does that mean? Are they ignoring the Shulchan Aruch? So I'll preface my remark with a story I once heard. And the Amshinover Rebbe is particularly known, perhaps worse than most Rebbes, of davening at odd times. It is well known that the Amshinover Rebbe would daven who knows what. Daven Shacharis at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. He would daven Mincha at 12 midnight. Daven Mariv, all sorts of crazy hours. Like, 6 o'clock in the morning, he would daven Mariv. It was known like that. So somebody, supposedly, this is a story I heard, I never saw it in writing, but I heard this. Somebody walked over to Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zechron Bracha, and said that, this is getting ridiculous. And there are a lot of people who follow him, and he has a shtibel, and a lot of people daven there. He says, and it's an aveira, you're not allowed to do that. So he was asking Reb Shlomo Zalman to make a macha, which means make a protest, stage a protest against Amshinov for doing such things. So Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, in his inimitable way, he says, listen, let me tell you something. He said, Chazal tell us in Pirkei Avos, Aveira gereres Aveira. A sin causes another sin. When you sin once, inevitably you're going to sin more. Because that's the nature of the Yetzer Hara. Once he gets you once, he'll get you some more. Right? Mitzvah gereres. Mitzvah, once you do a mitzvah, other mitzvahs will come along with it. Aveira gereres Aveira. And Aveira causes more Averas to sin. Right? So he said, I've known the Amshon of a Rebbe for many years. I never saw the next Avera. So if I never saw the next Avera, most likely the first one wasn't an Avera either. Because Chazal tell us that if you do an Avera, you're going to cause another one. But I never saw another one. So it must be that the first one wasn't such an Avera. So you leave the Amshon of a Rebbe alone. Whether other people should follow him, that's a different story. So the answer, my understanding of it is like this. When people daven, you have to daven, there's basically a Hasidic and Misnagdim way of doing this. You're supposed to daven at a certain time. But to daven in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu appropriately and properly, you have to be in the right mindset. With the proper awe, the proper respect, the proper mindset. You're not thinking about what's happening in your office. You're not thinking about what's happening at home. You're not thinking about the Orioles game. You're not thinking about other things. You are thinking about God. And you are thinking about your relationship with God, and that you are about to engage in a conversation with the King of all kings. That takes concentration. That takes presence and understanding of what you're doing. What happens if time comes for Shacharis and you're not there? You're not ready. So should you say, well, I'm not ready yet. I'm going to wait until I'm ready. I am going to miss the proper time for davening. Better to daven not at the proper time, but have the right kavanah, than daven now without the right kavanah. And therefore the Rebbes choose to push off. Yes, I'm not going to get as much brownie points. That's correct. Yes, that's true. But I can't face HaKadosh Baruch Hu and daven when my mind isn't there. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, the misnagdish way of looking at it, would be, buddy, get there, right? Get with the program, right? You aren't there yet? Well, get there. If it takes you a couple extra minutes, get up a few minutes earlier, right? You wouldn't be able to tell your commanding officer in the army, you wouldn't be able to say, Sergeant, I'm not ready yet. He would say, soldier, get there, right? Right? You know, that's your problem. You get there, right? It's not God's problem, it's your problem. So the Misnagdim would say, hey, guy, get your act together, right? And the Hasidim would say, if I'm not ready, I can't daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I am not telling you one way or another. I'll only add to the fact that I would say, personally, this is me, by the Rebbes, I think they can muster up that idea, that mindset, and they can say, I'm not ready yet, but in a couple hours I will be, and therefore I'll daven in a couple hours. By me, I'm not sure that in a couple hours I'd be any better off than I am now. And therefore, since I am anyway not so sure that in a couple hours I will be ready, so I might as well do it now and try my best to get my act together. Because if I can't get my act together now, there's no proof that I will be able to get my act together later. If I knew that I had the Rebbe, like the Amshanova Rebbe or the Sadva Rebbe, and I knew that I could focus and I could come up to God properly, then I would, I would have a much stronger reason to wait. But being as I know myself and I'm not there, so therefore I might as well do it right now and try my best. And if it didn't work, well, I got to just try to work on myself and try to get it better. Okay, that help you? Okay. All right, let's go. So getting back to the thing, to the discussion here. So the Gemara's question at hand again was, what's the main point? Should I do it, or is it connected to karbanos, in which case I cannot make up a missed mincha by davening 2 maravs? Or is the main aspect of davening rachmim, and in which case I can do it 24/7, 365? So where does the Gemara head? Tashma. What does tashma mean? Come in here. That almost always means a proof. Once in a while, it just means come and hear something. But almost always, 95% of the time, it means a proof. And here's my proof. The Amar Rav Huna bar Yehuda. That says Rav Huna bar Yehuda. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Says Rabbi Yitzchak. Okay, so he's quoting Rabbi Yitzchak. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. And he was quoting Rabbi Yochanan. So he's saying, Rav Huna bar Yehuda says, Rabbi Yitzchak said, and Rabbi Yitzchak said, Rabbi Yochanan said. So ultimately, this is all a quote of Rabbi Yochanan, who, by the way, we quoted just a little while ago. And what did he say? Ultimately, it was Rabbi Yochanan who said it. Ta, help me, made a mistake. V'lo yispalel mincha, didn't have mincha, mispalel arvis shtaim. Yedaven marav twice. Ve'ein bozeh, and there is not in this mishum because of the over yomo batal karbano. That once the day has passed, the carbon is nullified. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan apparently this statement of Rabbi Yochanan was less known, but Rav Huna bar Yehuda knew it. And he said, guess what? The Rabbi Yochanan, said explicitly, if you miss mincha, you can daven 2 maros. And he even went as far as to say, I know what you're thinking. I know you're thinking, what about over Yom Batal Karbano? What about, if the day has passed, the carbon is nullified? I know what you're thinking. Ein bazeh. There's no concern of that. Which means, basically, what Rabbi Yochanan has basically stated is, there we go. He is taking side 2, that the main concept of tefillah, the primary concept of tefillah, is not karbanos, but rather rachamim. And if that's the primary, therefore you can make it up the next day, despite the fact that you're moving on from one day to the next. And so, now we don't have a Mishnaic proof to that, because the Gemara proves it from a statement of Rabbi Yochanan, who was ultimately an Amora, not a Tana. However, that notwithstanding, we do have explicit proof from Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan, that's pretty good, right? It would be the equivalent of, Rabbi Heinemann said this. Okay, maybe he's not Rabbi Akiva Eiger, but meanwhile, it's pretty good. Right? So this is the same thing. So Rabbi Yochanan said this, fine. So therefore the halacha is, Rabbi Yochanan says, as it stands right now, the Gemara's answer is, yes, you can do it. Good? All right. Now, Meisvei. The Gemara is now going to ask a Meisvei. What's Meisvei again? Good. An attack question from a written source. And almost always it's a brisa. And this is an example of a brisa. However, don't get confused by the fact that the brisa opens up with a pasuk in Koheles. Many brisas do that they just open up with a pasuk, they quote a pasuk. Right? right? Many rabbis, when they speak, they open up with a pasuk from the Torah. Their first words is a quote of a pasuk, right? And they build off of that pasuk. So this Bryce is the same thing. The pasuk in Koheles reads, now, Meisvei always means that it's an attack question. Now, parenthetically, I will tell you this. If you would have asked me, and I just saw the word Meisvei, oh, okay. So the Gemara is about to ask a question on the thing we just finished saying. Namely, Rabbi Yochanan just paskined that you can make up a missed mincha by davening 2 marivs, and you can cross the day barrier, right? You can, that's okay, because the main thing is rachamim, like Eli said, right? Good. And now the Gemara is about to challenge that, right? But that's what I would have thought. I would have thought that it's referring to the last thing that we just said. However, you will see that as we go along, you will find out that this meisvei is in fact not only referring to the very last thing that we said, but in fact it's going to challenge the entire concept of make-up prayers. Not only when you make up in going from day 1 to day 2, but make up any time, under any circumstances. It's going to challenge the question of being able to make up from a shacharis to mincha too. So this meisvei is a little confusing, meaning when you first look at the meisvei, you would think that it's referring to just this last point. But in fact, when you read the whole meisvei, you're going to realize that it's actually referring to everything. The whole concept of made-up prayer. Okay, let's see this. The Brisa opens up with a pasuk in Koheles. Koheles reads, Me'uvas lo yuchal liskon, v'chasron lo yuchal lihimanos. So Shlomo Melech in Koheles says, Me'uvas, a error, a twisted thing, which means you now messed up, lo yuchal liskon. You can't fix it. Impossible to fix. There are certain mistakes that you cannot fix. V'chasron lo yuchal lihimanos. And something lacking, something missing, a loss, lo yuchal lihimanos, cannot be recounted. It's done. Finished. Gone. You blew it, you blew it. And it cannot be fixed. Okay? All right. That's the pasuk. Now, it is common in Koheles for those people who have learned a little bit of Nach, and certainly in Koheles, Shlomo HaMelech says things, and of course they're very deep, and he doesn't necessarily let you in on the deeper understanding of what it's referring to, so therefore you have to figure out what it's referring to. So the Bryce over here does us a favor and tells us what the pasuk is referring to. So now the Brisa goes back and says, okay, there were 2 parts to that pasuk. The first part is something which was a mistake cannot be fixed. And the second part of the pasuk is a loss which cannot be counted. Says the Brisa, I'll tell you what that means. Me'uvas lo yuchal liskon. Something which was twisted, something that was messed up, cannot be fixed. What is that referring to? Zeh, that's referring, Zeh, this is, Shebitel Kriya Shema Shal Harvis. Someone who nullified the Kriya Shema of the Mariv, meaning the nighttime Kriya Shema, Kriya Shema Shal Shachris. Or the Kriya Shema in the morning. Or Tfilah Shal Harvis. Or the prayer of the evening. Tfilah Shal Shachris. Or the prayer of the morning. What does that Brisa say? If a person nullified Kriya Shema, either by morning or night, or prayer, either by morning or night, that's it. He messed up. It's a mistake that cannot be fixed. Done. You're done. You're toast. You can't do anymore. The chesron, and a loss. Now this part is sort of tangential. The Gemara often brings a whole brisa quotes the whole brisa, even though the parts of those brises are not necessarily relevant to the discussion. But the Gemara will often remember things were quoted. Often everything was in those times Baal Peh, was memorized, and therefore people memorized the whole thing in one shot, and that therefore the Gemara will often quote parts of the brisa which are not necessarily pertinent to the discussion because they're part of the brisa. So here the second part is not that pertinent, but the Gemara is quoting it anyway. And something which was lost that cannot be counted. What is that referring to? That's that his friends were counted lidvar mitzvah for some sort of mitzvah, v'lo nimna imahem, and he was not counted amongst them. His friends got counted in to do a mitzvah, and he was not counted amongst them. I use an example, like, let's say that there's a group of guys who they said, let's go and make a visit to a chola. We're going to visit our friend so-and-so is in the hospital, he just had surgery. Let's go visit him. And a group of guys decide they're going to go. And then Charlie was, he was eating breakfast a little too long, and he was having his fourth bowl of cereal. And Charlie would have liked to go to the hospital also to visit their friend. Except the guys already got together and they got into the car and they went off, and Charlie comes, he's Johnny come lately, right? Charlie's a little too late. That's it. The guys went, okay, he's going to have to either go by himself or not go at all. But he had a chance to be part of mitzvah and he missed it. Okay, no. That's the way it goes. Chasron lo yuchal lihimanos. This is a loss that he cannot be counted in. His friends got counted into doing a mitzvah and he missed the opportunity. Sometimes you got to be in the right place at the right time. And if you ain't there, sorry, that's it. You can't do it. But that's a side thing. Let's go back to the main thing. The main point of the brisa was the first part, which is a mistake that cannot be fixed. What does the brisa say? You miss Kriya Shema or davening of Shacharis or Mariv. That's it. It's a me'uvas lo yuchal liskam. It's a mistake that cannot be fixed. So what's the obvious problem? It doesn't talk about Bimcha. But Rabbi Yochanan had said earlier on that there was such a thing as a makeup. What do you mean you can't make it up? Of course you can make it up. I thought that there was such a thing as makeup. Now you can obviously see that this is not a meisvei, this is not challenging just the last piece about going to the next day. This is a question altogether. This is talking about missing Shacharis. You blew it, the brisa says. That's it, you're done. There's nothing you can do. It's lo yuchal liskon, you can't fix this. What do you mean you can't fix it? Didn't Rabbi Yochanan say that you can fix it? You can daven to minchas. So you see that this brisa seems to be in the face of the entire concept of make-up prayer. Correct? You follow that? It's not only referring to the last thing that we discussed, it's referring to the whole concept in general. So what are you talking about, Rabbi Yochanan? There's a brisa that says explicitly, Muvas lo yuchal liskon. It's a mistake that you cannot fix. So you're done. And of course, there's a presumption here that says Rabbi Yochanan cannot or would not contradict the brisa. Right? A brisa is a higher authority. Rabbi Yochanan is an Amora. A brisa is from the time of the Tanoim. Now, theoretically, perhaps he could, but he wouldn't. Right? The presumption is that he wouldn't pick a fight with a earlier authority from the times of the Mishnayos and the Brises. So, what gives here? Right? Does that mean we just KO'd Rabbi Yochanan?
No.
One would think so. Not so fast. Rabbi Yochanan was a very, very, very smart fellow. Omer Rabbi Yitzchak, Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Says Rabbi Yitzchak in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. You see that? Rabbi Yochanan knew this brisa. And he comes in and he says, Says the Gemara, I'll tell you what the answer is. Hacha. What does hacha mean? Good. B'mayaskinan. What does b'mayaskinan mean? What are we discussing? What are we discussing here? Here, what are we discussing? Meaning here in this brisa, what are we discussing? Shabitel b'mezid. That he nullified it intentionally. You see, Rabbi Yochanan was on the ball. And he says, you can make up prayer with one caveat, and that is, if you erred. Notice that every time Rabbi Yochanan said about mistake, making up prayer, he always said ta'ah. If a person made a mistake, he missed chakras because of a mistake. He overslept or whatever, something you had to do something, whatever it is. He made a mistake. Then you can make up. Over here, this brisa that says it's a something that it's a ma'uvas, a error that cannot be fixed. That's referring to when he did it intentionally. As I say, you're watching the Super Bowl, okay? It's a close game, and you look at your watch, it's time for mincha. Mincha's shkiya's in 15 minutes. Yeah, but they're on the 40-yard line, and there's 6 minutes left to the quarter, right? And I am not gonna miss this play. It's 3rd and 6, and I am not gonna miss this play. That's bittul b'mezid. It's not that you forgot about mincha. You decided that this play was more important than mincha. Okay, that's bittul b'mezid. You, despite your love for the Super Bowl, you are amazed. You cannot make it up by davening 2 maros. Okay? Okay, I can understand your Yetzer Hara, but you're amazed anyway, right?
When it says haka here, is it referring to the meisvei?
Yes, the brisa. The brisa. When it says hacha, it means here the brisa. The brisa that you just quoted that says that there's no such thing as makeup, that's referring to shabitul b'mezid. That he nullified it intentionally. He knew what he was doing and he did not care, or he decided that the Super Bowl was more important than mincha.
Yeah, I'm just confused why I want to say hasam in our case of the.
That's because that hacha in the brisa, hacha is referring to the thing that was just said. So it's referring to the brisa. Do you follow? Okay. So the Gemara says, Omer Ravashi, says Ravashi. Ravashi was much later. He was at the end of the period of the Amoraim. He was the one actually who was very involved, and it was the primary editor of the Babylonian Talmud. Omer Ravashi, De Kanami. This can be deduced also. Rabbi Yochanan's answer that brisa is referring to when you did it intentionally wasn't just because Rabbi Yochanan was interested in getting some sort of answer to defend himself, but rather there's actually a deduction in the brisa that also indicates that he is right. Rabbi Yochanan was actually very, very right, because if you look in the brisa, it is deduced also. The brisa was very careful in its wording. Note that the brisa says diktani, that it states in the brisa bitel. Did you notice in the brisa? The brisa's wording was mu'uvas that cannot be fixed, a mistake that cannot be fixed, zesha bitel. He nullified Kriya Shema of Arvis, Kriya Shema of Shachris, or the Tfilis. He uses the word bitel, he nullified. V'lo katani, and it does not state ta'ah. And it doesn't say he made a mistake. So Rav Ashi comes in and he says, I want you to know Rabbi Yochanan didn't just make up that answer just to defend himself. If you're reading the Brisa carefully, and as they say, you're listening to the words carefully, you will see that that's in fact what the Brisa does say. Because the Brisa carefully chose its words. It uses the word bitel. He nullified it, which implies intention. As opposed to the word Rabbi Yochanan always talked, he always talked ta'ah, if a person erred. So the Gemara is now saying that the Brisa clearly is indicating, in fact, exactly what Rabbi Yochanan just said. Shma mina, we hear from this. Which means the Gemara, as I say in Yiddish, gekonchid, right? You're done. We have just proven that is in fact correct. Rabbi Yochanan's answer stands. That is correct. The Gemara accepts that as conclusive. Therefore, if your name would be Rabbi Yosef Kara, and you would be writing the Shulchan Aruch, I'm aware of the fact that your name isn't Rabbi Yosef Kara, but were it to be, and you would be writing this halacha, what would you write? Okay, let me ask you. If you missed mincha, can you make up by davening 2 marivs? Yes or no? Yes. Answer?
Only if we made a mistake.
Oh, yes. If you miss shachris, can you make it up by 2 minchas? Yes. If you miss mariv, can you make it up by 2 shachrises? Yes.
Only on.
Oh, but you're going to throw in a caveat and say that is all true only if you mistakenly missed it. You accidentally missed it. But if you knew what you were doing and you decided to sleep in, or you knew what you were doing and you decided to watch the game, that was your choice. And then me'uvas lo yuchal liskon. Such a mistake you cannot fix up. Yeah, that you have to do tshuva. You can fix it up with tshuva maybe, but you cannot make up the lost mincha, even by davening 2 marivs or anything else like that, because this is one of the rules. The Chachamim permitted you to make it up and said that the primary purpose of tefillah is rachamim. Yes. But that's all assuming that you mistakenly missed. But if you intentionally missed, no. Then there's no makeups. That was your error, that was your mistake, that was your flub up. And now, you cannot make it up. You now have to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for tshuva, right? And you better, fix up your own ways altogether. Forget about tefillah. You've got some work to do, buddy, right? Okay? If you chose wrong, that's a different story.